Okay, continuing with the devotion to the Sacred Heart of Jesus, how to practice the Sacred Heart devotion by Father Croiset. We move into this second obstacle, which is called self-love. The first one was lukewarmness, and we saw how dangerous that is. And so the second one is self-love. And so we continue with this, thinking about this as we read, "Let this not befall us," and to pray against it, of course. Lukewarmness is bad enough, but then we have self-love. It is only too true that people who are not influenced in their actions by self-love are very rare. That people who are not influenced in their actions by self-love are very rare. In other words, most of our actions are influenced by self-love. And that the difference between spiritual people and those who are not spiritual people is that in the latter, self-love acts without disguise, while in the former, it is less visible and somewhat better disguised. So it is better disguised let me just get that. Never leave swatches with customers. It's a hit or miss. So it is only too true. Okay, self-love and the difference between spiritual people and those who are not spiritual people is that in the latter, those who are not spiritual people, self-love acts without disguise. While in the former, those who are spiritual, it's better disguised. If people wish to take the trouble to examine into the true motives of the most of their actions, which they think have least defects, they would discover that self-love is the most powerful motive, that it puts on 100 disguises and prevents the fruit of their actions. Self-love dictates that the practices of virtue to be adopted are those which give us least trouble and suit our tastes best. This specious pretext of preserving health, which most people imagine to be indispensable for God's glory, occupy the mind completely with 1,000 little worries. We take care of ourselves and spare ourselves. Almost all kinds of mortification are regarded as indiscreet or unsuitable for our age or state of life. Good inspirations and desires to labor to acquire perfection, which God sends at intervals, are treated as delusions. We try to persuade ourselves that God does not demand such high sanctity from us, although He has given us great graces, or placed us in a state which demand the highest sanctity. We flatter ourselves that we really wish to leave everything and undertake everything as soon as the will of God is heard, by His inspirations, by the advice given by our director, or spiritual father, by the lights which we receive in meditation, and by the examples which we see and which we approve of. We refuse to recognize the will of God when it contradicts our self-love. The reason is that, in truth, it is not the will of God that we take as the rule of our conduct, but our own inclination and our own self-love, which we wish to make the rule for the will of God. Why is it that there are people who are never so uneasy, so gloomy, so sensitive, as at the times when they seem to be most recollected and most eager to make themselves perfect. Why is it that there are people who are never so uneasy? People who are never so gloomy, so sensitive, as at the times when they seem to be most recollected and most eager to make themselves perfect. The reason is that the lights which they receive in prayer and the inspirations which God sends them disturb them, because they are at variance with the self-love with which they are filled. These people, it appears, wish as a prerequisite condition for making a serious effort to acquire sanctity, either that the road of perfection have nothing difficult, or that God fill them with exterior sweetness and consolation before they make the first step on that road. Although the lives of these people seem to be fairly well regulated and their conduct irreproachable, they crawl along in this languid state all their lives without ever correcting themselves a singular fault. It would almost appear better not to have certain virtues of which we are so proud. At least we would then recognize our want and misery. But the little virtue which we have appears to serve only to make us more imperfect every day. We content ourselves with a mere external rule, with natural or affected modesty, with apparent virtue which is the fruit of education rather than of grace. And because we see that we are protected against reproaches which people of more careless lives draw upon themselves, we imagine that we have much virtue because we do not show many faults. People draw up plans of devotion according to their humor, natural bent, or caprice. They find only so easily faint-hearted, obliging directors to approve of the system upon which their whole life turns, and that is why they are unmoved either by the example of others, or by their own reflections, or by the truths which touch even the greatest sinners. We need not then be astonished if these people, so full of self-love, are always seeking their own conveniences, under the pretext that they are willing to leave all. They do not wish to sacrifice anything, and if they deprive themselves of something, it is usually in order to make themselves important in their own eyes by this pretended mortification, and to enjoy quietly 100 other things which they have more at heart, and which they will not sacrifice. Usually they act according to their natural disposition and inclinations. They love only those for whom they have a liking. They refuse nothing to their senses, and if they mortify themselves in something, it is in what causes them least pain, or when this act of mortification brings them honor. We wish to do good works, but we wish it to have the satisfaction of choosing those which we do. Hence comes our repugnance for the smallest obligations imposed on us by our state of life, while we find an attraction for more troublesome occupations, provided they are of our own choice, or give us an excuse for dispensing ourselves from the most ordinary obligations of our state of life. We regard sickness in others as a visitation or as a gift of God, but God no sooner sends that gift to ourselves than we become disturbed, melancholy, impatient, and gloomy. It is not the sickness that produces that effect on us, but in sickness we appear as we really are, because we have neither the motives nor the means to disguise our self-love, such as we had in health. Wow. I just got... Hold on a second. Wow. From this same source of self-love come those sterile desires, those fantastic projects on which naturally proud people feed, and on which self-love nourishes itself. Certain grandiose projects are proposed by them, which are to be executed after a certain time, and forthwith, as if their conversion and sanctity were assured, they take no further trouble to correct their imperfections. Though they are persuaded that mortification is absolutely necessary for holiness, they refuse the little crosses that present themselves under the pretext that they are too light, but really because they are at hand, and they sigh for great crosses only because they are far away. Nevertheless, they feed on these vain imaginations. They rest content with this respectable exterior, with these good works which give them pleasure, and with those practices of devotion to which they are generally faithful, and intoxicated with vain, insipid praise which flatterers give, full of the idea of virtue which is possessed only in name, they are found without merit at the end of a long life, and often they have no more laudable sentiments than to be as good as they had been at the beginning of their conversion. These are the effects of self-love from which very few people are exempt. Don't let it be us. There is a legitimate self-love which he hasn't identified. Like taking a bath is self-love, but it's a legitimate self-love, right? Eating every day is self-love, but it's legitimate. Dressing very fancy is self-love, but that might be from disorder. How much we are to be pitied if we nourish within ourselves an enemy that is all the more dangerous because he is cunning, and because we are not at because we are not on our guard against him. Now, it is evident that Jesus Christ will never recognize as true friends of his Sacred Heart people who are completely attached to their own ease and who, loving only themselves, give him such grudging service. He himself has told us so expressly when he depicted the character of his true servants. In vain, he says, will people flatter themselves that they are his disciples because they have left their possessions and their friends, if they do not renounce themselves and even their lives. We must then do violence to ourselves. We must wage war against our passions and destroy or at least mortify our self-love if we wish to be his true disciples. There is no true love of Jesus Christ where there is no real mortification. Okay, self-love. Avoid mortification. Doing the least. Avoiding the cross. Choosing bigger and loftier crosses. Remedy mortification. You don't like to talk to that person? The person's within your environment? You could mortify your lack of desire to talk to them by saying hello. you don't like eating that food, instead of complaining about it, you can say, I'll have some. The third obstacle is secret pride. Now, the reason why we're going through all of these is so that you can pray against them. And this should be a regular prayer. So as we make our manual with notes, we can make points of things to pray for. Pray against disordered self-love, against secret pride. This way God can help us and show us, if we're truly devoted, this is where your secret pride is. Okay, so what is secret pride in this third obstacle? And then we get to the fourth obstacle, some unmortified passion. And then that ends chapter 2. Secret pride is no less an obstacle to the love of Jesus Christ. In fact, it is a real obstacle. There is no greater obstacle to perfection, and consequently to the ardent love of Jesus Christ, than the spirit of vanity by which most people are dominated. Vanity. Most people are dominated by this. Secret pride is no less an obstacle to the love of Jesus Christ. In fact, there is no greater obstacle to perfection, and consequently to the ardent love of Jesus Christ, than the spirit of vanity, by which most people are dominated. Vanity. I don't want that. Thank you for thinking of me like that, but I would prefer to stay alone if you don't mind. Vanity is the greatest obstacle to perfection. Wow. Vanity. So we got to pray for humility. Vanity is the greatest obstacle to perfection, and consequently the greatest obstacle to ardent love of Jesus Christ. Then the spirit of vanity by which most people are dominated. We have to root this out, and we have to make notes on this to pray against it. Lord, deliver me from my secret pride. It's one of the counsels of St. Vincent Ferrer in his spiritual exercises. To deliver me from my secret pride. He was asking for that for himself. We'll get there. Don't despair. Don't despair. Hey, has any of you been attacked by a spirit of melancholy lately? Let me know. If you've been following this and you're developing great confidence in the Sacred Heart, have you been attacked recently by a spirit of sadness where the evil one suggests to you something completely opposed to that which you hope for? Or to that which you are aspiring? You don't have to let me know in detail. It's not my business. But If so, you're not the only one. You're not the only one. The devil does not want us to be devoted to the Sacred Heart. He does not want us to have any hope. And he wants us to be sad, miserable, and despairing. That's what he wants. Where Christ wants us to have the opposite virtues. So, vanity is the greatest obstacle to perfection. Other enemies are overcome or weakened by the practice of virtue. But vanity feeds on this very practice. Even our victories are weapons which the devil makes use of against us, profiting by them to inspire us with pride. It may be said that of all of the vices, there is none which has stopped more souls on the road of piety, none which has brought down more souls from the heights of virtue, and plunged them into lukewarmness, and even into licentiousness, which means being very liberal with sin. From this spirit of vanity comes the immoderate desire to appear important, and the extreme eagerness to succeed in everything that we do. In vain do we endeavor to find reasons to assure ourselves that we are seeking only the glory of God. We have only to listen to the voice of our conscience to know that it is for our own glory that we are laboring. So it should be easy enough. Pay attention to your conscience and see why it is you're doing. If you're achieving great virtue, remember, my God, thank you. So thank God for your victories and know how easily you can fall. This isn't very complicated. Let's not make this very complicated and fear that, oh my God, I might be deceiving myself. I don't know. If you keep praying, begging God, any advancement, keep reminding yourself, is from God. Don't let pride take over and let you think that you're anything. Just because you fast every other day, don't even tell anybody about it. Keep it to yourself. And don't even think about it. And say, if it weren't for the grace of God, I would be a dirty animal. I would be disgusting. And this way we can accuse ourselves of not even doing what we should be doing, or we should be doing better with the graces that He gives us. This way we won't be attacked by that pride. Okay. So he says, if just listen to your conscience to know, you'll know that it is for our own glory that we are laboring. The inordinate fear that we may not succeed, the sadness and discouragement when we have failed, the joy and exultation when we are praised and honored, are so many visible proofs that deep-seated vanity is the motive of our actions. This same spirit infiltrates into the exercise of the greatest virtues. Virtuous people try to be mortified, obliging, honest, civil, and charitable, but they are very pleased when their virtues are known, because, as they say, their neighbors will be edified. From this same source most faults proceed. People are easily puffed up by the idea of virtue, which they do not really possess, and which would be destroyed by their vainglory if they possessed it. People like to recount their adventures. They have some personal experiences to give to illustrate all topics of conversation. And one would think that when a person has acquired some reputation for virtue, he is at liberty to sound his own praises on every occasion. Pride makes people wish to be popular, to possess the esteem and affection of everyone, with the result that they prefer to dispense themselves from their obligations rather than to disoblige anyone. And what is still more strange, they try to cover this ambition and vanity under the specious pretext of honesty, charity, and even of helping others to be virtuous, vainly endeavoring to persuade themselves that it is necessary to act in this manner in order to make virtue less difficult for others. What? Does true virtue derive its charm from the faults and imperfections of others? People try to please God and man at the same time, and in doing so displease God and often fail to please men. From the same source spring delicacy on points of honor, cooling of friendship, grief resembling envy, though not so malicious, secret pain at the success of others. The success of others is always attributed to some accident. People try to minimize it, they speak coldly about it, and if anyone becomes enthusiastic about it, they call him a flatterer. The reason of all this is that we are full of vanity and pride. So look, the prayer has to be, my Lord, deliver me from vanity and pride. Because you can't recognize it. You don't know where it is. The reason of all this is that we are all full of vanity and pride. We are sensitive to the least offensive word, to the smallest suspicion of contempt. We think ourselves at liberty to dispense with certain duties of courtesy toward others. But we will not pardon others if they are wanting in what we claim to be our rights. And through a still more ridiculous illusion, some people imagine that the honor of God whom they serve, and of the great virtue which they flatter themselves that they possess, requires that they parade their wit and talents and their good qualities, natural and supernatural, before everybody. And if after that anyone has not all the esteem and veneration for them as they expect, they think themselves justified in believing that he is a person of no virtue, a libertine who has no regard for merit, and no esteem for virtue. These are not all the evil effects of this secret ambition. There is also the love of display, eagerness for applause, and praise for everything which they do. You will find some who labor much for God, but who are always telling everybody how much they labor. You will find them always worrying about you will find them always worrying, always in a hurry, fatigued, overwhelmed with work. You would think that they are inviting everyone to have compassion on them for their overwork. The truth is that vanity plays a large part in their overwork. They think themselves very important, in fact indispensable, and wish to be regarded as such. Pride insinuates itself into all their actions, even those which should conduce most to humility. People sometimes like to distinguish themselves in the practice of certain virtues, and even in the exercise of good works. But is there not danger that it is less for God that they labor than because they attract great attention to themselves? Finally, the excessive sadness and discouragement which they experience after some relapse into their old faults is not the result of delicacy of conscience, as some people imagine, but of secret pride which makes people think they are great saints than they really are. Finally, some people pass for pious and think themselves so, who are guided by mere worldly prudence disguised under the name of common sense. To smother any qualms of conscience, they bring everything under this rule of so-called common sense, which they have made for themselves. It is even according to this false rule that they judge of spiritual things, divine operations, and marvels of grace, approving of only what suits their caprice. Caprice is changing your mind back and forth. They limit the action of the grace of God in themselves and others according to the maxims of human prudence, and by a strange blindness, which is the punishment of proud people, they think that they are only following reason when they are going away more and more from the Spirit of God. Oh my God, let us not waste our time with the Sacred Heart devotion be filled with pride. God, please deliver us from pride. Please give us humility. And after all of this, they are astonished that they have neither... can't. I just can't. And after all this, they are astonished that they have neither spiritual consolation nor sentiments of devotion. After 10 or 20 years spent in the exercise of supposed virtue and the practice of many good works, they complain that they are making no advance, that they are still imperfect, that the frequent reception of the sacraments is without fruit, and that they feel no devotion. The secret pride which they nourish at the bottom of their hearts dries up the source of the greatest graces, and is the cause why people who appear to be so wise, so regular, so reserved, who have lived with such honor, who have been proposed as an example of honest people in the world, and who, according to all appearances, should be laden with spiritual treasures, arrive at death with their hands empty of good works, self-love, petty ambition, and secret pride having taken away or corrupted everything. It is this worm which causes the tallest oaks of the forest to wither, this leaven which sooner or later corrupts the mass, or swells it up and fills it with wind. You know how to get past this? Beg God for humility and expect to be humiliated, so that we are not guilty of this and waste all of our time trying to move the Sacred Heart to grant us these special graces and favors which we seek, while we're loaded with self-love. God forbid. I get sad just reading this. I don't want this to be me or you. It is evident that the love of Jesus Christ cannot be found along with a vice which is so opposed to it. How could this divine Savior, who made humility the first of the Beatitudes, the foundation of the spiritual life, the first step on the road of virtue, how could he who invites his followers to learn of him, because he is meek and humble of heart, be loved by those who resemble him so little? This sincere humility of spirit and heart constituted the distinctive character of Jesus Christ. It is therefore impossible for us to be animated by his Spirit and dwell in his Sacred Heart unless we have this true spirit of humility. The only notes I'm going to make on this is to pray, because there are so many intricacies which he just mentioned that I'm afraid it could affect any one of us. So I'm going to write on this: pray, pray, pray for humility and a spirit of what? Self-forgetfulness, which is humility. Let us not think anything good of ourselves. If we have good, we should say, wow, God is really moving me along here in the spiritual life. I don't do that anymore. Thanks be to God. Whatever. I don't want anybody to be held back because of this secret pride which we harbor, according to Father Croiset. So, the fourth obstacle is some unmortified passion. Passion. And what are we talking about? We're talking about obstacles to the devotion to the Sacred Heart. Okay? And we have secret pride, self-love, unmortified passion. And the first one was what? Tepidity, lukewarm. I'm dying to know if any of you were attacked by a spirit of sadness, a spirit of confusion, and, like we would say in the world, having your cage rattled. Because I was talking to a friend today. I had a Catholic working with me today, and I said, "Can the devil put you in a mood?" He said, "Yes." And he was in the seminary, this young man. And he said, "It's actually thoughts that cause those bad moods." I said, "Exactly." Anyway, I just wanted to know if anybody that's following this book was beset with the same sort of disposition. It'd just be interesting to know. Anyway, the fourth obstacle to the devotion and the fourth source from which those defects arise, which prevent or smother the love of Jesus Christ, and consequently devotion to his Sacred Heart. See, we're talking about obstacles to devotion to the Sacred Heart, which is love of the Sacred Heart, and just being... The devil has the power to put thoughts in our heads. And so those thoughts can make us think, and thinking can put us in a sad mood, a negative mood. And so I was wondering if anybody who's practicing this devotion since this book began had experienced an attack of bad thoughts and negative, like, temptations to doubt the Sacred Heart. Not that you would consent to it, but just temptations, just attacked by a spirit of negativity with regard to this devotion. That's all. I was just wondering, because it actually happened to me today. And I said, what is going on? So I hate to talk about these things with anybody because it makes you seem like a quack. But I said, hey, can the devil give you... Yeah. I said, can the devil give you, like, melancholy thoughts? He said, absolutely. I said, all right. I said, I was so confident yesterday, and all of a sudden today I'm attacked. Because yesterday I said, Jesus... At benediction, I was amazed, and I said, I was hit with this thought, believe that you shall receive. And I realized it was a command that God gave me in St. Mark 11:24. Whatsoever you ask when you pray, believe that you shall receive. And I realized that it's part of the deal. You pray, and it's a command, believe that you shall receive. I was overwhelmed with confidence. Today, I was hammered with thoughts of negativity, and I said, what is going on here? And it brought me down, and I said, and I started thinking, it's a spiritual thing. And I confided to this guy who was a student in the seminary, and he said, yeah, you can be attacked with these thoughts. So you know what I just kept saying? And boy, let me tell you something. My devotion is growing. Thank God. I just kept saying, Jesus, I trust in you. Jesus, I trust. And then with the individual things that I'm praying for, it helps me pray. Jesus, I entrust this to you. Sacred Heart. I address Jesus now as the Sacred Heart. So I say, Sacred Heart, I entrust this to you. Sacred Heart, I completely entrust this matter to thee. And this way, it's a manner of praying. You're petitioning the Sacred Heart. That's what he wants. That's what he wants. And far be it from me that I'm going to be attacked by a spirit of pride. It will block the Sacred Heart from giving you any graces. It's so dangerous. So if you're humiliated... Yeah, that's beautiful. So I don't want any of my friends on this channel to be overwhelmed by any spirit of negative thoughts, any spirit of negative, any doubts. They come, but the way to counter them is say, Sacred Heart of Jesus. Jesus doesn't want us to be melancholy about anything. Nothing. It's contrary to what he wants. And so we have to immediately dismiss it as something outside of the Sacred Heart. It's not from God. And so we have to counter it with prayer. So I was just wondering if anybody else got hit with that. That's all. I only see 3 people watching this anyway, but 3 people that I know. But then there are about 15 to 20 who watch each of these videos, and none of them ever comments, which is fine with me. I was just wondering. I would love to hear, for the people who do watch this, if they were attacked with the spirit of sadness and overwhelmed with temptations to doubt. I don't know. So the 4th obstacle of this devotion, the 4th source from which those defects arise which prevent or smother the love of Jesus Christ and consequently devotion to his Sacred Heart, are certain unmortified passions which are spared and which sooner or later will be the fatal cause of some great evil. It's interesting, right? Like, what is he talking about? Most people who wish to give themselves to God and who consequently declare war on all their vices behave much like Saul in the war which he undertook by the command of God against Amalek. God had ordered Saul to exterminate all the Amalekites and to destroy all that belonged to them without sparing anything. Saul exterminated the people, but touched with compassion, he spared the king and kept for sacrifice whatever was most precious in the camp. But this disobedience cost Saul his kingdom and was the cause of his reprobation and ruin. Oh my goodness. 1 Kings 15, 3-23. You know what reprobation means? Hell. Many people follow the example of Saul in the war which they undertake against their vices. May God grant that they do not share his fate. They are quite persuaded that God wishes them to sacrifice all their passions. So far I don't understand. And that he cannot allow them to spare any vice. And that he, God, cannot allow them to spare any vice. They consent in appearance, they make war on all their passions, but somehow there is one predominant passion which they spare. There is something which they regard very dear and very precious, which they will not touch. And in order to get over any scruple, they find some pretext for sparing this enemy. They kill the spirit of the world in themselves, but they are very pleased to see it live in their children. They dress very modestly themselves, but they like to see their daughter sumptuously adorned. Okay, so far so good for me. They give up gambling, but they frequent the gatherings. They moderate their outbursts of anger, but they spare their secret ambition and jealousy, which they cannot bring themselves to destroy. They mortify the external display, the worldly air which seems incongruous in people who make profession of loving Jesus Christ. But they retain the liberty of passing whole hours, making themselves amiable to everyone, in order to gain them for Jesus Christ, and of making virtue attractive and easy to practice. They insensibly do just like everyone else and retain only the name, only a vain idea and a little outward appearance of virtue. Some who are more generous break the great ties which attract them to the world. They leave their parents and their possessions, and they even give up their liberty, submitting themselves to the yoke of religious obedience, but they take themselves no trouble to break the lesser bonds, that is to say, the 1,000 little attachments which retard their progress in virtue. And of what advantage is it if the bonds which attach us to creatures are small, if they are many? One bond, even though small, is enough to prevent advance in virtue, unless it is broken. Finally, there are generous souls who resolve to conquer all the obstacles and who make serious efforts, but who will not go against their natural bent. They spare some failing that is in harmony with their inclination. And this one enemy spared, this one unmortified passion, this one fault which they will not correct, this one bond which they will not break, makes them limp along all their lives and prevent them from arriving at this height, this high perfection to which they are called. Therefore the Lord hath rejected thee from being king. 1 Kings 15:23. A small leak will sink a great ship, and a small defect will ruin the finest edifice in time. A single spark will cause a great fire. Death is often caused by the neglect of a slight illness. A single defect is sufficient to spoil an otherwise beautiful painting. We are sometimes astonished at seeing people who have grown old in the exercise of piety, really spiritual people and very mortified, who have, however, great imperfections which they condemn in others, but which they will not correct in themselves. Oh my God, just reading this, you just don't want to be this person. They are constantly praising themselves, always for some good motive, and under some specious pretext. In fine, they neglect to become perfect when they are young, and they find themselves very imperfect when they grow old. These are the great obstacles to the pure love of Jesus Christ, and consequently to the devotion to the Sacred Heart. These are the sources of so many imperfections, which are only too often found in people reputed to be spiritual. Imperfections, however, which do great harm to real piety by the false idea which they give of the devotion. Solid piety condemns all these faults wherever they are found. True love of Jesus Christ will not endure these imperfections, this lukewarmness, this secret pride, this self-love. The defects which come from these three baneful sources are not found in those who possess true love. Nevertheless, without this pure, genuine love for Jesus Christ, there is no solid virtue, there is no perfect virtue, there is no solid devotion. Please, let this not be us. This is sad to read for me. It's sad because it seems like it's so complicated that it's beyond me. And so I have a remedy. My God, I beg you, deliver me from unmortified passion. You know what I'm saying? Deliver me from this spiritual disease. I think I have the remedy. Just be true. Just be honest, Be honest with ourselves. Examine our consciences. Why are we doing this or that? You know what I'm saying? We gotta do it. We gotta do it. Difficult or not. We have to do it. It's an obligation. Otherwise, take this book and throw it out. The reason why we're doing this is to have a unique love for Jesus Christ. No, I'm very motivated. I'm very motivated. This is my life. This is the only thing I have. I need to do this in order to advance. It's not going to help me if I'm showing off my I don't want anybody to know about anything. Just God. And you know what one of the things I find is important to do? Yeah. Well, that's what he's saying. That it's hard not to have he's saying that self-love. But don't forget, there is a legitimate self-love. There is a legitimate self-love. We are supposed to love ourselves and to seek the good of ourselves. And one of them is virtue. It's the most important thing. That's a legitimate self-love. And so we engage in this devotion in order to, first of all, Jesus says, seek first the kingdom of God and his justice, and all these things shall be added unto you. So we're motivated selfishly. But that's not a bad thing. The motive being a good selfish motive. There's something very, there can be something good about self-love. So we could call it selfishness. We are necessarily selfish. We look out for ourselves. And so we do this devotion in order to reap the benefits of the Sacred Heart. That is a legitimate self-love. What's so wrong about wanting to get from the Sacred Heart what he wants to give us? Nothing at all. But the way to do that is to practice perfect love of God. And the way to do that is to practice the Sacred Heart devotion. And so we should be desirous to be delivered from disordered self-love. You know? I think the Our Father contains everything that we need to say, deliver us from evil. Is that a disordered selfish motive? Deliver us from evil. Amen. No, it's in the prayer of the Our Father. And to move the Sacred Heart. I mean, what motivated the Canaanite woman when she said, Jesus, Son of David, do thou have mercy on me? That was very selfish. She wanted to be delivered from evil. God delivered her. It was a legitimate selfish motive. And she begged and humiliated herself. Oh no, I'm going to continue begging, desiring, and I'm going to do whatever God wants me to do, whatever I got to change, I'm going to do it, and wait until the good Lord grants to me the petitions which he insists that I bring to him. I'm not going to be discouraged one bit. Do I have a lot to overcome? We all do. Yes. But I've begun. I can say I have begun. My God, cried a great servant of God, what disorder, what turmoil. At one moment people are happy, at another people are sad. Today they are gracious to everyone, tomorrow they will be like a hedgehog that nobody can touch without getting pricked. It is a visible proof that there is little virtue, that the natural inclinations are getting free rein, and that the passions are not mortified. A truly virtuous man is always the same. A truly virtuous man is always the same. Is there not danger that if we do good occasionally, it is more as the result of whim than of virtue? A truly virtuous man is always the same. Isn't there danger that if we do good occasionally, it is more as the result of whim than of virtue? So in other words, he's saying, don't just do good from time to time. Be even about it, even keeled. Do it all the time. And that ends chapter 2 on the Sacred Heart devotion, exposing the obstacles to the devotion and giving us 4 of them. So there we have it. The next chapter is 3, means for surmounting the obstacles. Wow, this is awesome. Have no fear or despair. There is a remedy. Means for surmounting the obstacles that prevent us from deriving fruit from the devotion to the Sacred Heart. Beautiful. Now he's going to tell us how, if we suffer from this garbage, okay, how we can overcome it, all right? And so this is awesome. He tells us true mortification, how to do that. Sincere humility. Oh, beautiful. I now have great hope that there is an answer in case I suffer from any of this garbage. The joy and sweetness which are inseparable from this exercise of humility and mortification. Oh, isn't this beautiful? See, I read all of this and I just don't remember it. I underlined it. awesome. So in the next chapter, in chapter 3, tells us how to overcome these vices. And I will do this later on. I'll do this because I'm going to go in front of the Blessed Sacrament, and I'm going to renew all of my intentions. I must admit, I was attacked with such a spirit of melancholy today. I can't explain it. And I know it's not from God. And it seems to be in proportion to the joy I had yesterday, because I remember reading in the last chapter that there is a sensible joy and sweetness that comes from the devotion to the Sacred Heart. And then I was attacked with the opposite. And I said, what is this? And it was so strong that I just knew it was what they call precipitous. It was so drastic and quick and or acute, as the doctors would say. You have an acute, it just comes on quickly. I said, where is this from? So I confided in a friend. I said, you think this could be from the devil? He said, absolutely. So, I just don't like blaming the devil, I don't like when people do that. It sounds weird. But I am trying to practice devotion, spread devotion to the Sacred Heart, and I have no doubt that this isn't... The devil doesn't like this. Enough about the devil. So I guess we will cover that if it comes up in this book. Okay, so we will see you on the next one. Thanks for watching, and please keep up your prayers, keep up your desires, renew them. I present them to Jesus throughout the whole day so that it's not programmed. When I get home, I will pray. No, praying throughout the day and offering my work for my intentions. All right. Let's get into the Sacred Heart. That's all I can say. Thy kingdom come. Enthronement of the Sacred Heart in the home. It tells you what to do, how to do it, and what the promises are, and the prayers, etc., etc., etc. Thanks, everybody. You're all wonderful, all of you. My Catholics are my only friends. My only friends. They're the only people I want to be friendly with. And all the rest, I love them. I don't care if they're pagans. I don't care what they are. I don't judge anybody anymore. People are in a state... I have met people who are not Catholic who are so nice. May God have mercy on all of them for rejecting the true faith. If they, in fact, rejected it, I don't condemn anybody. It's not my business what other people are doing. I'm just concerned about myself and to please God, lest I become that critical person. In yesterday's epistle, St. Paul condemned that God was not happy with most of them. I don't want that to be me.